Hello, and welcome back to the Simply Smarter podcast. I'm your co-host, Jill.
And I'm Caleb.
Hello.
Welcome.
Yes, it's been just a little while since we've done the podcasting world, but we're happy to be back and ready to dig in.
I know. Ready to go.
Cool.
Let's do this.
There's a question that we get a lot, which is why we wanted to do a podcast surrounding this burning question that so many people have. And there's just so much discussion around it too, right?
Yeah. And so much information that may be right or may not be right. And we're going to get into it.
Mm-hmm. The question is, drum roll, do I need to take the ACT or not?
Ooh,
Seems
or the
like
SAT, right?
Or the SAT. Yeah. Seems like a simple question.
So simple.
But
not a very clear answer.
Not a clear answer because it is different for every school.
For everybody. For sure.
And then not even just every school, but within different majors within that school.
I know. Remember when we thought it was so weird when like years ago, like certain schools would use ACT scores one way for admissions and a totally different way for financial aid. And it was just like a bizarre, like, why are they looking at these scores differently and super scoring in one way and not the other? Every school is doing weird stuff now.
And it's all different.
I say every, not every. Most schools are doing very weird stuff.
Correct. And it can change from year to year as well.
Oh, yeah. This is kind of interesting. So in my research, as I was getting ready for this, and it's pretty fascinating. I was searching through the lists of online lists that were talking about like, hey, which schools are test optional and what does that look like for the class of 2024, 2025 or 2026? And almost all the lists are over a year old now. So like they're so crazy. Outdated already. Like I don't know what that's going to look like and nobody does.
And when do they update that, right? Is it January of every year? Is it September of every year?
Well, most colleges start making their decisions on what they're going to do for the upcoming like class. So like most colleges are having that discussion like now here in May, or maybe they had it in April, or maybe it'll happen in June for the class of 2024, not even the class of 2025, who are those rising juniors at this point.
Ugh.
Kind of crazy.
It makes it hard to navigate.
So right. For sure.
I mean, your junior year is really hard to navigate anyway, right? There's so much going on that year. So let's break it down.
Yeah.
Let's break it down.
Let's do it.
So just as a review, right? Let's review test optional versus test blind, because those are some phrases that also parents get confused. Students may kind of understand it, but let's break that down a little bit more and explain it to our listeners. So test optional. So many schools are test optional right now, right? I mean, explain that to us, Caleb.
Yeah. So test optional means that the student can submit scores or they don't have to. It's up to the student. And the college, most of them say it doesn't matter. Send them or don't send them. We'll if you send them, we'll use them to bolster your admission file. Test blind, on the other hand, means that they don't even have a place to put it into their system. They're long gone are the days of a paper file, right, for students. And now it's just entering it into their system. And if there's not even a place to enter it, like it really won't ever play a part in the process or the decision. And I think that's an important distinction to make, because I think a lot of people think test optional is test blind and vice versa.
But it's not.
But they're actually quite different. In fact, the best information that I can gather right now, it shows that there are only 55 schools who are actually test blind.
Okay.
And around 40 of them are part of just 3 like college systems. The University of California system, the UC system, California State, and the CUNY system in New York.
But then they also use their own version of a test, correct?
Well, they're going to have their own placement tests and all that kind of stuff, which, I think that's another piece to be aware of in the puzzle, right? We had a student come back last summer who didn't even really want to take the test and ended up having to come back and prepare for some obscure exam for the college that he was going to that we'd never worked with, but we could do our best. But it was a very, very poorly made exam. So it was much more difficult to prepare for because they didn't have very good instructions. or there weren't very many details. And then actually some of the system was actually flawed.
Oh my.
So that's fun.
Yeah, it makes it really difficult for that student, for sure. For sure. Well, let's get into some of the colleges, right? So a big one around the Kansas City area is going to be the University of Kansas. So KU. I took a look at that page, that website, that page yesterday, and it says that you don't need to take the ACT or the SAT, right? So if you go to the admissions page, it's right up at the front there.
Yeah, they clearly state that as long as you have a 3.25 GPA or higher, and again, this is unweighted. So I know a lot of students talk in terms
out of 4.
Over a 4.0, they are going to recalculate your GPA. And we've talked about that extensively on other podcasts, but they're going to recalculate the GPA. And as long as you have a 3.25 or higher, you don't have to take the test, right?
Okay.
Right.
That's what a lot of people are saying and a lot of people think. But digging a little bit deeper, we found that there's other pages that start saying, prepare for the test in December of your junior year.
Right.
Well, why are we preparing for the test if you don't need it?
Right.
So, I mean, quote unquote, register as early as December for a February or April exam, unquote, on the KU website.
It feels incongruent to me.
Right.
And I think this is where we live in this world right now, is that even colleges, their messaging is messy because I don't think they exactly know, right? Pre-pandemic, KU had raised all of their standards and raised the ACT minimums and all of that. And now here we are. And I feel like there's some people that are still on board with that. And there are other people that think, hey, we're going to be test optional in this sense. It's an interesting world, right?
It's a little confusing. So
it's very confusing.
We kind of touched on this a minute ago, but within every school, there's different standards,
different colleges and different schools within the university.
But then within that degree, different degrees. So let's kind of get into that with KU.
Right. I think it's just a very good example, and it's one that a lot of people here in the Kansas City metro area know. So I think it's a good example, but I think other schools, whether it's Mizzou or K-State or some of the other state schools in the area, they're going to be using very similar things to get into their different programs.
So an architectural degree.
Yeah. If you want to study architecture,
guess what? You have to take the ACT.
To take the ACT and
get a 24.
A 24. So you have to score roughly in the 75th percentile to get into that particular school, into that program. And I think that's lost on most people, right? They think, the University of Kansas, they say it's test optional. I don't really need to take it, but maybe your program, maybe you are really dedicated to architecture and that's your number one option. Well, you're not going to get into the program, and maybe you end up spending a fifth year in college because of that, which is lots of money and time and yuck.
Yeah. There's several others. I mean, and there are degrees that don't require the ACT or the SAT for sure. So if you know what major you want to go for, dig in, do your research. If you don't need to take the ACT, you don't need to take it. Yeah. Fine.
I will say, and I've had a couple parents ask me about this recently. It's the idea of like, should I not take it? What's the point of preparing for it? Well, if a student has, let's say, 8 schools on their college list and one of them requires it, you need to take the test, right? Otherwise, that school can't be on the list.
Right.
And I personally don't think that's probably a good reason to eliminate a school from your list. Maybe it's not a good fit. Maybe it's too cold, or maybe
too big, too small.
Right,
who knows?
Something like that. But because they were going to require a test that other schools are going to also do some placement exams or whatever else it may be, I don't know if that is the ideal reason to eliminate a school.
Agreed. I would rather be over-prepared than under-prepared.
And I think it's, even right now, we alluded to this earlier, it's difficult to even know what the schools are going to require a year or 2 years from now.
Yeah.
So it just feels a little risky.
It does. A couple more majors for KU: engineering,
Engineering, yeah. So what do they require?
28.
28.
28.
So, and that's actually a 28 or higher in the math section in particular, along with at least a 3.0 GPA, right?
Yep. So yeah, dig into it. See if you're dedicated to the engineering program. Listen.
And that's not just like not just engineering, actually. It also includes things like computer science.
Yep.
Which these are majors that are becoming more and more important and popular in 2023, just because there's so many exciting things going on with AI.
Yeah.
And the new technologies AI. And oh man, it's amazing.
Let's just have a timeout button
a full podcast
right there
on that.
For AI or not for AI. What are your thoughts?
I think it can be done correctly. I'm just the long-term ramifications. There are challenges behind it for sure.
Yeah.
And I think we have to be cautious, and I just think it's like the Wild West right now.
I know. I
and it's happening so fast.
So fast, yeah.
Right? ChatGPT came around just a few months ago.
Right.
And all of a sudden, it can just do so many things.
Yeah.
Man, it's unbelievable.
You're right. And it can be great. It can be great.
Yeah.
But I'm just thinking also for students writing a paper, what is it going to be like?
It's fascinating.
All oral now? Like you have to write your paper in class?
So, well, did you see some of this? Like there were so many students who were doing that.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden there's now an AI kind of plugin where you can actually like search and it'll detect whether it was written by AI. So now professors have that tool. Like that's how fast things are happening, right? In 2 months, insane. 2 months ago, you couldn't have a paper written like this in 5 minutes or 3 minutes or 30 seconds or whatever it is. And you could like hand it into a professor and they'd have no idea. And then just like that, now they can detect it. And
oh my goodness.
It's wild.
It is wild. Yeah. So lots of good, but also lots
pretty
bad.
Weird. Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
A couple that kind of jumped out to me that require not like, hey, we recommend an ACT score. Two that said that they actually required them. One was design and one was interior architecture.
Yeah,
I thought that was fascinating.
That is interesting, isn't it?
Because sometimes we think of that as more art focused, and I think a lot of it is. But I think they're fairly popular programs, so I think they are trying to use. They want the best that they can get in those programs. Yep. And they've decided that an ACT score, design is a minimum of a 21 and interior architecture is a minimum of a 24. I think they're looking for students who are going to help build the program and put their best foot forward and contribute in class and communication and conversations. It's interesting.
It's also interesting because that is paired with your GPA. So 21 or plus on the ACT with 3.25.
Yeah, both. Yeah.
And a 24 on the ACT and a 3.0. So if you have a lower GPA, you still have to have that higher ACT or SAT.
For sure.
So keep that in mind too. That's kind of an interesting aspect of that.
And then you have some schools like the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences or journalism or education or social welfare, which are just basically following what you actually see when you're searching what are the requirements for admission at KU, where you have to have that at 3.25 GPA or higher, or you have to have a 2.0 GPA and a 21 or higher on the ACT.
Right.
It's kind of interesting.
And let's just dive into the GPA a little bit. So, maybe as a freshman or a sophomore, you're like, I have so much time. I have so much time on my hands. And, I can study harder when I'm a junior or senior when it actually matters. Well, not the case. Right. Not the case.
Right.
It's a big learning curve for students. And, if they're preparing for college, if they're taking high school seriously, they'll know that.
Yeah.
They'll know that. But, maybe you only have a 3.0.
Right.
Well, you have to have a 21 now.
Now that has to
or
happen.
higher.
Exactly.
So there is a time and a place to reach that 21, and it's not just 5 years ago.
Right.
3 years ago. I mean, like you said, things change so quickly.
And it's kind of interesting because I think there's been serious grade inflation for a long time. I read an article last week, and I could have sworn that it was written like last week.
Yeah.
But it was actually written in 1999 talking about this grade inflation. And like, it was amazing because it was so like everything was true except for even more so now. But like, especially during COVID, there were a lot of students who were passing or getting A's, and there was minimal work being done. And I think that's actually made the later years, junior and senior year, even more difficult because now there are so many gaps.
Yeah.
And I think students are having to stress a lot more than they were even before. And there was a lot of stress on students pre-pandemic, and especially during junior year.
Yeah.
And so sometimes GPA is suffering at the later end as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good point. And let's just talk about the average ACT score through the pandemic, right? It's gone down
Average
to
GPA or average ACT?
ACT score. Yeah. It gone down to a 19.8.
Yeah.
So
the lowest it's been since the mid 90s.
Yeah.
The mid 90s were rough.
Right. And to be honest, that's not shocking. It's really not
at all.
I mean, given the past 3 years.
Right. And this is with fewer students taking the exam.
Correct.
Right. So as the population gets smaller, you would kind of think that it would be the higher scoring students sticking around and they'd be performing better. But even that hasn't caused it. So it's even artificially lifted up to some degree statistically.
Yeah. Good point.
There are so many gaps. I feel for these kids. Yeah. I see it every single day, and they're basic things that we just took for granted for a decade and a half. And all of a sudden, here we are.
When do you think that will begin to shift?
I think, what is it, 2023? So we are 3+ years into this. I think for the most part, as long as kids who were in 5th, 6th, 7th grade at the beginning of this, I think for the most part, they'll be fine.
Yeah.
Or will be better off than these students who miss key concepts in algebra or geometry along the way.
Yeah, I agree. All right.
My
oldest
hopeful.
is golden then. Okay, good. Good.
Right.
You're doing great. Well, let's move on to a different university. Let's talk about Baylor for a second.
Baylor. We hear a lot of students want to go to schools in Texas, so that's a good one.
Yeah, we do. Right away on their website, they said that they'll be test optional through the entering class of fall of 2025. So I appreciate that. That
is fantastic.
Yes.
I mean, for what it's worth, I'm sure there's going to be some confusing pieces to it, but you know what? Like, at least they are upfront and they've made the decision long enough in advance that students can kind of prepare for that.
Yeah, exactly. Digging into the website a little bit more, that's like you said, that's where it got a little confusing. They put a lot of emphasis on whether or not to be test optional or not. So they gave a paragraph on whether to be test optional and then a paragraph of whether to take the test and why it is important to take the test.
Right.
And it clearly stated in the admissions page that the middle 50% of students had an average ACT score of 25 to 32 with a mean ACT score of 27.9. So why put that on your website if it's really completely important. Test optional, right?
It's been an interesting world, honestly. Like, it's just been a strange time where we are trying to understand this along with you all. And having been in this world for 2 decades now, like I'm blown away by some of these decisions, and the marketing just seems off.
Yeah.
Because if you are saying you're test optional and that the test is not a high value, then why are we bragging about our average scores being so great?
Yeah, agreed.
It just seems like an odd dichotomy, I guess.
There was a little bit in here. It said, for some students, that might be best reflected with a test score. For others, a test score does not fully reflect their potential. So, let's dig into that. What else besides the test score and GPA our college is looking at?
Yeah. So in addition to that, they're also looking at like strength of schedule. I think that's an important piece. So making sure that you're challenging yourself, and you don't have to take every AP class, but take an AP class, even if it's a stretch, like challenge yourself a little bit. And then of course, other things are going to be like college essays, which have become more and more important just because how do you differentiate yourself when everybody has a great GPA and they don't use scores and maybe extracurriculars were weird for a little while, all that kind of stuff. So that's an important piece. Maybe a college interview where you actually sit down and talk with an alumni or somebody in the admissions office.
Right.
And then the other one, of course, is demonstrated interest. And I think that has become more and more important where students, the more you can actually engage with the college, whether it be an email or multiple emails, follow-ups, asking questions, or registering for virtual campus tours or going and actually checking out campus in person.
Yeah, if you can.
Any of those things, those contact points they're tracking, and they're able to take that into account as well.
Very good. Yeah. And I've heard about the demonstrated interest so many times over the past year. So I think that's a really big key piece as well. So I'm glad you touched more on that.
For sure. Can I interject?
Yes.
A little bit?
Please do.
When
do you want to
you're
talk
on
about
these
more
campus
AI?
tours. Not yet.
Okay.
We'll do that after the podcast.
Cool.
Or maybe the next podcast.
Okay.
We'll really dig down.
That'd be
That'd
good.
be intense.
That'd be good.
So when you're on those campus tours or you're contacting these counselors, I would strongly encourage you to ask two very specific questions. And hopefully they have a good answer.
2 questions.
I am not confident they will, but I'm very optimistic.
Okay.
Sort of optimistic.
Question number 1
is, do you accept students test optional? Are the programs different? We've talked about that already.
Yep.
And 2, what is the acceptance and retention rates for students who submit test scores compared to those who do not submit test scores?
Okay.
Because I think that would be a very informative thing to help you understand, do I need to take the test, even though the school's test optional? Are my chances of getting accepted higher if I do submit scores, even if they aren't amazing?
Right.
Do I have a better shot at getting in?
Well, it's a good comparison.
100%.
And students kind of thrive on that, right? So that is an important piece.
Yeah. It was interesting for the class of 2021, and I think for 2022 at least, at Yale, which is a preeminent school in the nation, right? It's amazing. They stopped disclosing all of their acceptance rate information because they wanted to kind of obscure this, and they didn't know exactly what was going to happen when they went test optional during the pandemic. So it's interesting. If they have the information, I would kind of push them and see if you can get that information, because that'll help you make a better decision as well.
Is Yale still test optional or no? Do you know?
You know what? For the class of 2024, I'm not sure off the top of my head. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I wish I could say right off the bat, but I don't want to say one way or another.
But clearly, if you're getting a high ACT or SAT score,
right,
and just looking at the historical, GPA and ACT scores, if you're up there, go ahead and submit it.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And we were talking about some of those test blind schools earlier. Like Caltech is one of the test blind, which is one of the most selective schools in not only the country, but in the whole world. And it's fascinating to see, like, I can't imagine being in the admissions office. Like maybe, like basically all other students were scoring 33 to 36 already. Right. But at least you had a little bit of a differentiator. What happens if everybody walks in and every single applicant has a 4.0 or 3.97 and higher, right? And every student has a great essay, and how do you differentiate? And I feel for some of these admissions offices.
I feel at that point, like you said, the interview would be a really key component.
Has to be huge, right?
Right, because everyone else across the board, GPA, ACT, essays, those are all going to be wonderful, right?
Yeah.
Excellent. So then what's that differentiating piece?
Right.
I think an interview is very telling.
Right. 100%. One of my concerns would be is if legacy plays a larger part than it probably should, right? And don't get me wrong, I do think legacy is a thing, for better or for worse.
Right.
But I wonder, if that is now one of the bigger decision
Which is unfair
factors,
at that point, then.
Unfortunate, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's
Anyway.
silly. Let's talk about some, unless you have anything else to touch with that.
No.
Okay.
Those were my two big ones.
Good. I love those questions. Let's take a look at some of the colleges and universities that still require
Yeah.
an ACT or an
100%
SAT.
required.
Yes. Not test blind, not test optional. You have to take the ACT to get into this college,
Right.
or SAT. So Georgetown.
Yeah.
Everyone knows Georgetown, right?
Everybody.
32 to 35.
Go Hoyas, right?
Yes.
Yeah, average scores are 32 to 35, and they're not test optional, which a lot of schools went test optional back in the day and are still test optional now because it's inflating their average scores. So Georgetown, 32 to 35, not being test optional is really impressive.
Yeah. MIT, even higher, 34 to 36 range.
Damn. They actually released a really detailed and informative basically study because they went test optional for a year during COVID, and they released like a 150-page report on why we're going back to requiring scores.
Oh, wow.
And it was pretty fascinating.
Yeah. And the summary?
Yeah. The summary is we're going to require scores because we want our students to succeed
Right.
and not fail out.
Yeah.
Because it's tough. I mean, you could be an amazing math student at your high school, but still
Comparatively.
when you're in the elite math students of the world, it could be uncomfortable for a lot of us.
Yep, exactly. University of Florida, 29 to 33.
Yeah. What Florida has done has been interesting in how they've continued to require scores all the way through the process. I don't think the University of Florida system went test optional at all. So
Interesting.
that's kind of interesting. And a great school.
Yeah, absolutely. Georgia Institute of Technology.
Georgia Tech.
Yep.
Okay.
31 to 35.
Yeah.
So still way up there.
Yeah, really good scores.
And then you talk about
All of our academies.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Naval Academy is a 26 to 32. West Point Military 28 to 33, and of course the Air Force 29 to 34.
Yeah. It's pretty interesting.
So, yep.
And again, just a sample, clearly not all of them.
Right.
But some of these really thought leaders within the world of higher education are still sticking with it because they have reasoned data to show this is important.
Yep.
So
Agreed. Yeah. So I think we've touched on, test optional, test blind, what exactly that means, different examples from different colleges, different majors within each college.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just to kind of reiterate, if your student knows where they want to go and, it's a test optional school or test blind school, figure that out.
Yeah.
Do your own research, look into it. If there's absolutely no need to take the ACT, there you go. But if, like you said, even one school, there's a possibility, go ahead and take it at the appropriate time. Again, you don't want to rush after your senior year either.
Right.
We've had that too. Like,
yeah, that's true.
Hey, actually, I got into this school and I can get a bigger scholarship if I get a higher score on my ACT. So, take it when the time is
you only
right.
have one shot at it, and that can be uncomfortable for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
Absolutely. So
Hopefully this is helpful for y'all.
I hope so. I hope it clears up some of the confusion and some of the wording around.
Right.
Yeah.
One last thing, fairly anecdotal. You talked to some college counselors recently.
Yes.
Throughout the Midwest.
Yes.
Tell me about your experience. What were they saying about all of this?
Yes. So I had one counselor in particular saying, well, for state schools, you don't need to take the ACT at all. So you don't need to take it. So there's really no point.
This was a Kansas counselor? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep. So it was interesting because like we talked about KU, clearly there's some opportunity to take the ACT.
Right. And some necessity.
Right. So it's just interesting. And, maybe some state schools don't require that, but not everyone's going to a state school either.
Right.
So again, do that research on your own and, don't put it off.
Right.
Because then you're going to do some crunch time and maybe not do as well. Right.
Right. Or you arbitrarily have to remove schools from your list. Mm-hmm. Right.
Right. And you don't want that to happen either. We want you to go to the school you want.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Put your best foot forward.
Very cool.
Very good. If you guys have any questions, we are here at GetSmarterPrep.com. You can give us a call at 913-322-3400. Other than that, get ready for the AI podcast next week.
Here it comes.
All right. See you later.
Y'all.